Now, our next speaker is Dr. Melanie Latter. Now, Melanie studied veterinary science at Sydney University and completed a PhD in veterinary pathology. Now, Melanie's main aim for becoming a vet was to make a difference to animal welfare. So, in 2010, Melanie changed roles to become a senior policy officer in animal welfare with the Queensland Government. She obtained membership in animal welfare from the Australian and New Zealand College of Veterinary Scientists in 2014 and now works as the Veterinary Affairs Manager for the Australian Vet Association based here in Canberra. So please welcome Dr. Melanie Latter.
Thank you for the welcome and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight. I've been asked to talk to you specifically about a vision for animal welfare for the next 60 years from a veterinary perspective. I'm probably pretty typical of the majority of veterinarians who grew up genuinely caring about animals and wanting to help them. While the veterinary profession includes a diverse range of views on animal welfare, and we don't always agree on some of the more contentious issues, I think the central motivation of every veterinarian is a desire to improve the health and welfare of animals, and that's the reason most people choose to become veterinarians. One of the first things that really struck me when I began to study veterinary science as a youngster was how much like us animals are, or indeed how much like animals we are, and indeed humans are just one species of animal. And people who study veterinary medicine know this better than anyone probably, possibly. There's so many similarities in anatomy and physiology and the nervous system and our internal chemistry and functions. And because of this, the diseases animals get are very, very similar to ours. People are often surprised to learn that animals get diabetes and the heart conditions that we get and all the different types of cancer that we get. And we have so much in common with the other non-human animal species. And being a veterinarian does give you a unique insight into that. Not only are animals biologically and physiologically similar to us, but a huge amount of research in the last 20, 30 years and more recently, including behavioural studies, brain scans using things like MRI, now show without a doubt that animals have comparable behavioural and emotional states to ours. And obviously this applies to some species more than others, and particularly to mammals, but the more we look, the more we realise that animals even lower down the evolutionary tree, like reptiles, fish, even squid, are aware, are sentient, and in other words that means they can suffer. And we know many animals show empathy and grief, and the science absolutely backs this up. But I'll bet everyone in the audience already knows this. Anyone who's had pets or cares for livestock or wildlife or any range of animals knows instinctively that animals have emotions and hence much in common with us. As the well-known researcher and animal advocate Professor Mark Beekoff in the United States says, to live with a dog is to know firsthand that animals have feelings. It's a no-brainer. And I really like this. We all know it, vets know it for sure, because we've studied it and because we see it on a daily basis. And it's precisely because of this acknowledgement that we are just one of many sentient species on this planet that we feel a responsibility and a desire to look after the welfare of animals, to make sure that where they're used by people, that they're treated well. And most importantly, that they're kept in ways that not only maximise their health and welfare, but also allow them to fulfil their key behavioural needs so that they can experience a life worth living. So who are the AVA? The Australian Veterinary Association is the professional organisation representing veterinarians across the country, including those that work in companion animal practice, livestock practice, government, research, teaching and industry. And what are the ways in which we contribute to animal welfare? We contribute around $30 million or more of pro bono work in welfare just in our private practices. We work in animal welfare shelters and organisations. We conduct targeted desexing programs. We run a program called AVA Pet Pep, which educates children on how to understand and appreciate their responsibilities towards pets. We give expert advice on welfare of animals to state animal welfare advisory committees, and the government. We serve on ethics committees, and we serve often as expert witnesses in cases of cruelty and neglect. We also develop a large range of policies on animal welfare topics, and we use these as the basis of our advocacy. Our policies are very much science-based, with consideration of the latest research literature on animal welfare. We get involved in issues such as the review of the greyhound industry, development of dog breeder regulations, cat management regulations, breed-specific legislation, just as a few examples of our advocacy campaigns. And what is our vision for the future? Firstly, national animal welfare leadership is on our list. In October this year, we're jointly hosting an animal welfare roundtable with RSPCA Australia and the National Farmers Federation. We're inviting all the former participants in the Australian Animal Welfare Strategy to discuss ways in which we might be able to re-engage in some sort of nationally coordinated animal welfare leadership. We believe it's essential to have a mechanism such as this to drive continuous improvements. We want science-based standards that don't just reinforce the status quo, but drive tangible improvements in how animals used for human purposes are treated. Next, we'd like to see every animal receive the medical and preventative health care that it needs to lead a good life. We believe a key part of this is an increased uptake of pet insurance so that all companion animals can receive the high standard of veterinary care they deserve, and so that people don't have to make agonising choices not to treat in cases where, based on financial constraints, they can't make that commitment. In Europe and Scandinavia and the UK, animal pet insurance is much higher level than it is here, and we think that's key to providing the high standards of pet care that animals deserve. Thirdly, we'd like to see optimal livestock health and welfare. Many of the ways in which our farm animals are managed have come under scrutiny in recent years, and people are particularly concerned with how these animals are kept, as well as some of the painful husbandry procedures which are performed for management reasons. Now, there's a lot of work being done to address these issues. For example, improvements in pain medications for livestock have recently become available, and these will help to reduce suffering in the short term. In the longer term, genetic advances will potentially make some of those painful husbandry procedures a thing of the past. For example, advances in cattle genetics will allow animals to be bred without horns, eliminating the need to conduct painful dehorning procedures. Genetic selection of sheep will potentially make the need to mule sheep redundant in time. Vaccines are being developed that will hopefully render the need to castrate farm animals a thing of the past. Indeed, these are available in the pig industry already, and we would like to see broad uptake of this sort of technology. The ABA very much supports these sorts of initiatives, and our veterinarians will play a pivotal role in implementing these improvements. In addition to reducing the suffering caused by human interventions, we also want to prevent unnecessary suffering that occurs from lack of intervention, if you like, when there are preventable conditions that we can avoid. For example, chronic lameness and mastitis in dairy cattle can severely compromise their welfare, and as can diseases, parasite infestations, and other forms of preventable conditions. So the veterinary profession aspires to a situation where these sorts of avoidable sources of suffering no longer occur due to improvements in animal management and veterinary involvement in all aspects of preventive care and herd health. Some of our companion animal breeds have been selected and bred for appearance rather than function. Breed standards that result in suffering, such as the flat face of the brachycephalic breeds, these are the pugs, the bulldogs, that needs to be addressed. These animals have to often have corrective surgery just so that they can breed at even 60% of the level of normal and live a reasonable life, not even a good life often. So these are the sorts of conditions that we hope in 60 years will be well and truly addressed. We hope that with better awareness, breeders will respond and change their breed standards away from physical traits that lead to debilitating conditions, so that in 60 years our canine companions will live lives of optimal health and function. We envisage a society where all companion animals are not only healthy but live in such a way that their behavioural needs are met. We'd like to see companion animals better integrated into society so that everyone who wants a pet and is capable of providing appropriate care can do this. This might mean more freedom around pets in rental and apartment type accommodations as we become increasingly urbanised. It also means more pet-friendly nursing homes, retirement homes, office places and community facilities, as is already the case in some places such as Germany and the UK. Companion animal breeding should be according to standards that are enforced so that puppy farms and unsuitable breeding conditions are a thing of the past. We'd love to see sustainable breeding practices in accordance with demand and thus an end to the oversupply of pets and the need to euthanize unwanted dogs and cats. In 60 years, I hope we can aspire to having achieved this. There's so many other things I could mention on our wish list of how the world will look for animals in 60 years, but I fear in 12 minutes I can't cover them all. So ultimately, a statement of vision for 60 years hence would go something like this. A world where all animals are able to function well, feel well and fulfil their behavioural needs, where welfare matters and cruelty no longer occurs, and where veterinarians, by virtue of their unique professional training, contribute actively to the achievement of this goal. Thanks.